It's like Shakespeare, but with lots more punching. It's like Goethe, but with lots more crunching. Like Titanic, but the boat's still floating. No, it's not. The motherfucker is exploding. Nextwave.
Hey everyone, before we get started today, just wanted to remind everybody that our Batman Absolute The Long Halloween contest is still going on, and there are 4 ways you can enter this contest, and that is to give us a like on Facebook, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to write us an iTunes review, or follow us on Twitter. And if you do any one of those 4 things, you're entered into the contest. If you do all 4 of those things, you're entered into the contest 4 times. And if you've already done any of those 4 things, you're already entered. We'll announce the winners on or around the 11th of June, and we'll ship that out to you guys. So thank you for being our listeners, and this is kind of our gift to you guys. So go ahead and enter that contest, and we'll get you a free copy of Absolute Batman The Long Halloween if you win. Thanks for listening, guys. View from the Gutters, Episode 68. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning: the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode. This is 68.
Oh my god.
68.
I lose track because we have so many now.
I
Humble brag.
don't even know. Hashtag humble brag.
Yeah, so we're talking about Nextwave. Oh, well, I'm Andrew Chard.
I'm Tobiah Panchin.
I'm Joe Preddy.
Brant Eddy.
And I am the manly mountain man, Cade Reynolds.
All right. We just called him that off mic. He didn't just come up with that himself.
No, we did.
Or did
No,
he?
that's
No, he really did.
We don't know.
trademark Tobiah Panchin.
Yeah.
Manly
See,
Mountain Man.
people don't know this, but we actually found Cade in the mountains.
Yeah.
Living in a shack made completely out of comic books.
Hey, you guys can see my picture. You see my beard. Sometimes it gets cold in the mountains.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about Nextwave.
Yeah.
We are talking about Nextwave.
And Toby, you pitched this book. So
I
do you
did.
want to start us off this week?
Sure. I absolutely love this comic book. And it's weird because I love it more every year that goes by. And I kind of mentioned this on the pitch when I pitched it last week, that when it came out in like 2006 and 2007, which was right around the same time as Civil War, because there's one cover that's not a Civil War tie-in.
The last issue.
Like, it felt very out of context with everything else that Marvel is doing. And it feels very much in context with what Marvel's doing right now.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like it could sit on the shelf right next to, like, Hawkeye or Defenders.
Secret Avengers is really similar to this right now, and stuff like Superior Foes of Spider-Man, which is now like done, but is definitely in this kind of vein.
But I think it's really interesting because it's a deconstruction of superhero comics, but it's not a deconstruction in the way that you see a lot of. I mean, Watchmen was a deconstruction, The Dark Knight Returns was a deconstruction. A lot of the things that you saw in the 90s, like the Youngblood and Spawn and stuff, those were in a certain sense a deconstruction of superhero comics because they were taking out certain elements that had been very prevalent in the Silver Age, like, you know, the upstanding sentinel of righteousness and goodness and all of that stuff. And this does the same thing. Like, it kind of takes the hero out of superhero in the sense of like these noble, upstanding individuals who are selfless and stand for right and good. But it's not like those other things because it's wacky and fun and energetic and just like balls to the wall, like crazy comic book-ness.
Right.
Like 100 Wolverine monkey ninjas.
Yeah. The giant Wolverine monkey ninjas.
There's one giant gorilla Wolverine ninja.
Yeah, it's not grim or gritty in the way most
Not
deconstructions
at
are.
all.
There's no grittiness. It's actually like it feels like kind of a demystification or like deconstruction of comics in a way that is like let's embrace all of the elements that have yet to be embraced about that kind of stuff. Because, you know, there's so much stuff in like Silver Age comics and Golden Age and Bronze Age comics that are like this, that are just like, what the fuck is that thing that's like, what are these alien races? Like, why did they come down from space and give a guy superpowers? Like, why did they pick that? Like, what is that? What's going on?
Like, I feel to a certain extent this is a love letter to superhero comics.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's,
What do you think about it, Joe?
This book is one of the few comic books that makes me laugh out loud just about every time I read it. I feel like what it is it's like, I would love to see this animated or something, because it feels very much like the cheesy serial, very like out of that Batman, like Adam West's Batman tradition, where everything is kind of like, you get the occasional narration, like talking about the captain once patting somebody on the back so hard that their spine flew out from between their lungs, and then he was very drunk at the time. I mean, that's probably my favorite kind of humor. It's very Warren Ellis. Like, I think he really comes out in this, but it's just so much fun. It's just a ton of fun to read. This is what comics should be like. You know, I think that I was talking to somebody the other day about what bothers me about a lot of modern comic books is comic books I feel can be dark. I feel like you can tell dark stories if you need to. The Mask is really dark. You know, there's some great Batman stories that are really dark. It's that grim and grittiness that they try to do that kind of ruins it for me.
Ultra grimdark.
Yeah,
you know,
it's like
Everything is awful. Everything is horrible. Look at the muted colors. Everybody's wearing really dark colors. And we punch through people. It's like,
there's a place for that, though.
Yeah,
right?
there absolutely
is. It becomes a problem when it is like such a ubiquitous trope that there's nothing else that universe provides for you. Like,
that's DC, and I'm gonna chop your arm off.
It's when I get tired of it is when there's no alternative viewpoint, and this feels very much like the alternative viewpoint to the very serious nature.
Absolutely. I feel dark is a thematic thing, and grim and gritty is much more of like a very contrived and purposefully done thing that feels very unnatural. Like, it's about writing choices, right? And that's what makes this so good, is that there's very little to take seriously here, and yet it's still an incredible story that I have a ton of fun
it's
to
hugely engaging. I mean,
it really
the scene
is.
where they're in, what is it, like Wyoming, and the mindless ones are just all over the city, and they're like, this is the line.
My favorite
I have 100 of your Earth dollars!
fucking part of that book is when they just start being humans for no reason. Like one of them,
skateboarding
with the backwards hat on, and one of them's just carrying groceries. Like, it's just like, fuck it, we live here now. Like, this is my life.
I always kind of felt like that was a reference to Gremlins too, when they're all in like,
Gremlins 1, you mean?
or Gremlins 1, yeah,
Right,
when they're all in the bar at the end,
Yeah.
and they're all like, we're human, you know.
Yeah,
like,
they're watching the movie. It's
they're watching
in the theater together.
Snow White, aren't they,
Yeah.
in the theater? And they all
Yeah.
start singing the
Yeah, it's like that. It's like these monsters have come to Earth and then just immediately decided, like, oh, well, we live like this now.
It's like the mundanity of our universe has corrupted even ones called
The
mindless
mindless
ones.
ones.
Well, I kind of feel like the whole, like, the mindless ones are taking up, like, middle America, like, was kind of a snide commentary on Warren Ellis's part about the average American.
There's a lot of jabs at America in this, like,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Well, there's the whole thing with Elsa Bloodstone in the Europe shirt, which was a very specific reference to something that Mark Miller did, and I felt it was very righteous when he did it. Warren Ellis, not Mark Miller.
Yeah. Yeah, it's,
But just that scene where they're like, this is the line, we push him back. Like, you know, oh, are you those superheroes that we hear of and don't do squat for people in towns like this? Yes, we are. We're going to save the day. Okay, let's fuck these things up for justice.
And that's the great thing, is it's so evenly weighted, where there's like, it's a lot of fun, but there's always those superhero moments in there too, where they're like, yeah, we're going to kick some ass for justice.
there's a lot of that.
Yes, exactly.
You know, like a large majority of the book is
Here's
action.
the plan. We punch things until they go away.
That 12th issue I fucking love that when it's just like 2-page spread after 2-page spread.
Oh my god, there's like 5 of them.
Of just like the crazy shit that they're for the Venture Brothers-esque villains that they're fighting
The
in there.
Elvis Modocs.
Oh, I fucking
love the Elvis
love
Modocs.
Elvis
all of
Modocs
that.
are great. I think my favorite thing about this book is Fing Fang Foom's introduction, where they're like, "Mommy was a slut lizard that did the bad thing with a pile of radioactive waste."
Yeah, suggestive
something.
piles of
Was
radio.
I mean, has had the burning need to mate since 1956. Fing Fang Foom has absolutely no genitals whatsoever. That's the introduction that Fing Fang Foom deserves.
Yeah, there's so much about this, like, and I think that both you and Toby kind of hit this on the head, that this is a lighthearted take at a lot of the ideas that we see in superhero comics, but at the same time, like, it's not treated with any less weight. It's not like, hey, look at this joke. It's like, hey, we're gonna just kind of like focus on some of the lighthearted stuff, but like, the world is still being attacked. Like, things are still at stake. They're still defeating villains. Yeah, they're wackier, slightly weirder villains, but those villains need to be stopped too.
I'm not sure if I've really ever talked about it in the podcast. I know I've talked about it to some of you in private, but the core difference to me between what Marvel is doing on a cinematic level versus what DC is doing on a cinematic level is that DC is running away from the comic booky elements of their characters. Like, they're trying to make Batman like serious and like this could really exist in the real world, and Superman is dark. And
I think they're making action movies with a superhero plot line rather than making superhero movies.
Sure, but like with the Avengers and with the things that Marvel has done, they're like the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. It's an aircraft carrier that flies and turns invisible. How awesome is that?
Yeah.
And like everything that they're doing is an embracement of like, hey, comic books are crazy. Insane things happen all the time, and isn't that awesome? Like, he shot the thing and the tank exploded. That's so cool. Iron Man, whoosh, fly around. Like,
Marvel is making comic book movies for comic book lovers.
They're not even comic book movies. They're superhero movies.
Yeah,
right. And I think that this comic has that same embracing level of this is cool and crazy, and we love it because it's crazy.
Yeah. Brent, you have not said a lot so far, and you look ready. But first, move closer.
Get on in there.
Move closer to your mic, and then tell me.
Tell me all your heart's desires.
What do you think about this?
Okay, so there's a couple of different things I want to tackle. I'm going to go backwards. I don't think... there's been a lot of ink spread about DC's movie-making venture problems, and I think that the success of some of their stuff on TV right now actually puts the lie in the notion that they're not interested in telling superhero stories. I think one of the problems that DC has is that their characters are much more broad. That was always the appeal of Marvel's characters. Peter Parker is a young kid. Like, you care about Peter Parker first, Spider-Man second. Like, that was always the Marvel approach. Look at this guy, look at his problems. Oh, and he happens to have spider powers. A lot of their characters are done from that. And I think that the DC issue is that a lot of those characters are more iconic and mythic. And so Clark Kent is secondary to Superman. Clark Kent is where Superman goes to not be Superman. It's very rare to get a Clark Kent story that's really interesting and compelling. Right. And I think that the Dark Knight trilogy by Nolan, I think that Man of Steel by Snyder, and what they're doing on TV, those things all embrace a certain amount of those characters. I think they're trying to deal with some of those mythic things. I think the problem is that it's harder to narrow in on a unifying vision of what Bruce Wayne and Batman are, because that guy is 17 different things depending on which DC comic book you're reading.
Absolutely.
Tony Stark is Iron Man in every Marvel book for the most part. There's not a lot of variation between the Marvel characters about what their personalities are and what they act like. But you can pick up a DC comic book and Batman can be Adam West Batman. He can be, Dark Knight Returns, super gritty, I'm not going to kill you, but I'm going to let you die. And then he can be JLA, I put on a suit of super armor and fight Darkseid. Those are very different tonal things, and to put that into a film, I think that inherently makes those characters harder to deal with. So, I just wanted to spew that out.
No, I mean, those are all very good points.
The thing of... So, I like Nextwave a lot, but everybody here seems to like Nextwave a lot. So let's talk about the things that I think are problematic about this thing. I think that I think that in some ways Nextwave is only it's easier to appreciate if you're a comic book nerd.
Yeah.
It's easier to appreciate if you know some of the things about the Marvel Universe. Warren Ellis is certainly putting on his sly wink and a nod to be like, remember all these crazy obscure characters from Marvel? Mm-hmm. Look at them all playing in my sandbox. And I think that I don't agree with I don't know that lighthearted is the way that I would personally phrase this. This is very satirical in a sense, but it's not light, because in my mind, light is like the Adventures of Spider-Man. I could hand it to a 12-year-old. It's lighthearted. This is not lighthearted. This is just as gritty and dark and violent in a lot of ways as any of the books that we might compare it to. It's just that it happens to be kind of also kind of going,
yeah, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek
with it,
humorous.
which is different than it being light in my mind.
Yeah, I found a lot of parallels between this and Invincible, actually.
Yeah,
there were a lot of scenes where it's like, I think I saw that exact scene in Invincible, like an Invincible issue from like 3 years ago rather than the 8 years ago that this was made.
It might be a commentary on Robert Kirkman's inspirations.
Yeah,
that's very true.
I think that's a good distinction to make, because it isn't something that is accessible to everyone, and I guess something that's lighthearted kind of implies that it is, maybe in a way.
Maybe. I mean, I think that's the problem, is that it can kind of a fuzzy
when I think
concept.
lighthearted, I think of it doesn't take itself seriously. So in that regard, this is lighthearted, but I can totally see where Brandt is coming from, that lighthearted means something different to other people.
Yeah. And that being the first point, well, I guess not the first point you made. One of the points you made, though, about like this is very much rooted in that kind of Marvel universe, and that these are characters that, like, they're obviously, Warren Ellis is like winking and nodding at these characters, like, oh, remember how ridiculous Machine Man, and the fact that Captain Marvel, that Monica Rambeau has had like 15 different nicknames, right? Like all of that being said, this was the first introduction to all of these characters for me when I read this.
Oh, really?
And so
that's funny.
Yeah, and I was still able to, like, I was along for the ride, and so
there's
part of me that thinks that, like, if you know the language of comic books, like, this is something you could jump onto, but if you've never read a Marvel book before, I don't think it excludes you.
Yeah, I don't think that there's really a lot that you need to know about Marvel in order to really get this book.
No,
I didn't really know any of these characters except for the Machine Man from Earth X.
Right.
And if you've read Earth X, the Machine Man in that book is 100% different from Aaron Stack in this.
I wasn't trying to imply that you had to know these things to I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't necessarily, or not you can't. The end product is much more nuanced and layered, and I think it even changes its tone slightly if you know everything that he's referring to.
Absolutely.
That's fair.
Because in some ways, I think, and I guess maybe that's where in my mind it draws the distinction between being lighthearted and satirical. The Machine Man he presents is completely it's almost insane, the difference, to the point where it's obviously parody of that character. Like, Warren Ellis is almost basically saying, there's no way a robot would be just basically that bland and dull. Instead, let's make him a psychopath who likes to, like, chain smoke and fuck people. I mean, like...
It's definitely satirical.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So I mean, I think that there's this almost, you can't, if you know what the baseline for some of these characters are, it's an amping to 11. And, like, the Monica Rambeau thing is really interesting because, of course, in some ways, this is a character that got a lot of ink both when she was created and in the years past about being, dynamic African-American female superhero. But at the same time, like, Marvel's kind of shit all over her. They kept changing her name, their costume, what team she was on, how relevant she was. So it'd be interesting. I think you really could go back and dig all kinds of weird commentary out of this thing.
Oh, absolutely.
If you really had all of the source material in hand as far as what Marvel's put out.
Well, I was familiar with most. I was not familiar with Elsa Bloodstone and the Captain. I'm not even sure.
I think the Captain's a purely...
I think he is a purely Elysian.
He is unique to this
He
comic.
is unique to this comic. But, like, Tabitha, like, I remember reading this the first time and going, is like, this is Boomer or Boom Boom or any one of the number of names she had while she was on X-Force. That's so weird to see that because she's just such a throwaway character in those stories. Like, it was just an excuse for Rob Liefeld to draw
someone who was female who blew stuff up instead of
exactly.
someone who was male who blew stuff
but,
up.
like, Monica Rambeau, like, one of the things, I definitely appreciate what what Brant is saying, and I think in that way it is similar to things like Invincible, because you can read it and you would be like, maybe you wouldn't get all the jokes, maybe you would think it was kind of interesting, but you're not going to get the most there is out of this book unless you have more than a passing familiarity with the Marvel Universe. I mean, the whole reveal at the end, like with Devil Dinosaur and everything, like that becomes... If you didn't know who Devil Dinosaur was, you would just kind of be like...
I didn't even know, even right this moment,
really?
that Devil Dinosaur was in anything else.
Devil Dinosaur and Moon Boy.
Yeah. And
I didn't know. And I think that's the mark of a multifaceted quality work, is when it's like, this is, like not equally approachable if you don't know anything versus if you know everything, but it's like, it's not impenetrable. Like, you can still find things to enjoy even if you know nothing about these characters.
And that's the point that I wanted to make, is that you're not necessarily going to get the most out of it if you are not familiar with these things. But I feel like it's accessible on a level where if you know nothing about Marvel, this is still a fun book.
I also would like to make the point that I also think that this is also. How many more times can I say also?
As well.
I think that this is a very good distillation of Warren Ellis's work in superhero comic. Well, actually, I think it's a very good fusion of his work that's not superhero and superhero. So Ellis is in my higher lists of writers that I really enjoy, and I'm willing to kind of give the shadow of a benefit of a doubt to, rather. But for me, he's kind of what I like to call like 70, 30, 100, where 70% of the time I'm going to love his stuff 100%, and the other 30% of the time I'm just going to kind of stare at it and be like, I don't quite know what's happening here. I just find this is especially true of his novels.
I found that happen even in this book.
Yeah. But I think that this is a really accessible title if you are a fan of Ellis but don't necessarily like superheroes. It has his marks and handprint or fingerprints all over it, and you don't really have to necessarily know the characters, and you can still kind of be like, ha, 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 oh, Warren, you wacky guy. Which is funny because some of his superhero stuff I really enjoy. His run on Thunderbolts is probably one of my favorite series ever. Yeah. And that's much darker, much more serious. There's no slapstick or anything else in that series. And then he's got other things, like he did a run on X-Men at one point called the Ghost Box, I think, with Simone Bianchi. And
that was Astonishing X-Men.
Yeah, and I could not stand it. I don't like Bianchi's art very much, but I didn't like Ellis's writing on it either. So I think this is a very good piece of work that's done by him, and it shows what he's capable of. I think to a certain extent when he's kind of let loose. I don't think there's as much of a leash problem with him as there is maybe with like Grant Morrison, like we were talking about the last time.
Well, I think something to note about this too is like the ramifications of this series have yet to really be explored in the Marvel universe, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I don't think that Devil Dinosaur, like him showing up in here, was ever like, oh, and then remember that in Nextwave? Like, I don't think many authors have mentioned Nextwave, and kind of on purpose.
There's one thing that's crawled of Nextwave, and that is this particular characterization of Aaron Stack, which has appeared in 2 or possibly 3 other books since then. Because he really didn't have a personality before that.
There is also a passing reference in, which Avengers title is Rambo in right now?
She's in Mighty Avengers.
Mighty Avengers. I believe it was a throwaway panel, basically, where either she's interiorly monologuing or someone says something to her. Like, and then there was the one time that you were kind of doing the one thing, and she's like, "Yeah, we don't really talk about that."
Yeah.
Well, I believe that they said at one point that while this happens in the 616 continuity, these characters are actually people who came from a different Marvel universe as like superhero tourists, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is why they're acting like so weirdly out of character. They're from like Earth 8.
And to be fair, it's like, I think that when you let someone like Grant Morrison off the leash, depending on what the books, like what the ramifications of those are, like who chooses to reference those books makes a big deal. And I think that at some point Marvel was like, hey, Ellis, go crazy. We'll kind of give you this little pocket area to explore. Right. You can use characters.
You can use Midwest USA. No one ever does anything there.
Yeah, you can use all of these characters because no one's going to touch those. You can use these villains because no one knows who that. And you can kind of do your own thing. Like, no one else is using the dank dimension. No one else is like, you can use these and kind of do your thing. But like when we see Grant Morrison, and spoilers on Animal Man, go back and listen to that. But when they say, oh, here, Grant Morrison, like kind of do your own thing, like he starts to pull apart the threads of the universe. And not only like with the remembering pre-crisis stuff, but not only does that affect his book, but other writers were like very influenced with that, and were like, we're gonna grab those threads. That's gonna continue out through the universe. When he does Final Crisis, other people had to respond to that, and I think this kind of continues my discussion of the Elseworld from last week. But like this kind of stuff that exists semi Elseworld, semi imaginary story is healthy as long as it doesn't like start to then.
Well, Warren Ellis has
permeate.
written a specific thing, and it would be hard for me to track it down, but he essentially talked about how when you're doing your own thing, like anything goes, but when you're playing with somebody else's toy box, you have a responsibility to put those toys back in the box in the condition that you got them in.
And it's interesting. I think there's actually, you probably could go back and tear through all the different interviews with different folks within the comics community, but I think there are at least 2, if not more, philosophies that seem to generate from folks who do superhero work, and I think Ellis falls into that hole, like you were saying, Toby. These are somebody else's toys. I put them back in the sandbox, where I think Morrison and a few others, Joe's favorite, Jeff Johns, have a more of approach.
Sell your toys.
Well,
give
no,
your toys away. They're going to throw them out of the window.
Well, I would say more charitably, they have more of a "this is my toy box right now" philosophy,
Bendis
and of course,
is kind of like that too.
Yeah, although I think because I think this is more like if we're going to use this toy box metaphor, he walked into the center. One of the very polite teachers said, "Here are the 20 toys that you can do whatever you want with," and he was like, "I'm going out to the sandbox and I'm going to blow shit up."
Yeah.
Whereas I think what's happening, what happens over at DC, at least with some of these folks that we're talking about, in the case of Morrison or Johns, they say, "No, you get to run the school. You get to tell people how they get to play with these toys." Or we're going to give you the best toys, and then when anybody else dreams about playing with the best toys, they're kind of.
They're like, I've already put them in my cabinet. I can't let you play with
That's
them.
right. Yeah. I've already, touched them and colored this one with my special crayons. So you kind of have to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fair. I appreciate the kind of Elseworlds feel of this book, because it's something I can read. It feels timeless because it doesn't tie in with anything. It feels like it's got its own flavor, and yet still somehow it's a part of the Marvel Universe. And I'm not really concerned with what came before and what came after, because the story that I get is like a fun little entree that I can just kind of enjoy by itself and then go, that was really fun. Now I don't need anything else. And that's why I think it's kind of something that's cool to give to someone who's like maybe just moderately familiar with the Marvel Universe. It's just like, hey, try this. Because if they like this, I have other books to give them.
Everybody now knows who like Wolverine is and Captain America and Thor. And I really think that, I mean, this book does feel like it is in the Marvel Universe. You have a lot of things that an indie book would not be able to put in and have the same jokes work.
Right, yeah. There's, just the idea that it's referencing in-house stuff that happened outside of this book, for sure. But I still feel like it works so well. Like, I love to hand this book to people that are like, I'm looking for something that's funny, but also a superhero book.
I'm gonna probably butcher this, but I believe this is Wade Von Grawbadger.
Who?
Wade Von Grawbadger, which the name doesn't ring any bells for me, but he was the inker, and then Dave McCraig did colors. When we were talking about All-Star Superman, that the colors were really important. Mm-hmm. You, Andrew, who said that it was really important.
I don't believe that Chard said anything about colors anytime.
No, he really did.
He hates to talk about colors.
Because you weren't here doesn't mean it didn't happen. You were on your own show, doing your own thing. But anyway, I think that also helps add to that. This is a really bright comic. Immonen's pencils are really sharp. So I think the panels look dynamic. The action looks really fluid, and of course he also does this thing, Immonen, where we get these really wide pan shots. So especially with Fing Fang Foom, right, we're seeing really far away, and then we're seeing really close in. He does some fun things, even though I don't think the panel work itself ever goes anywhere particularly nuts. But I think that sometimes that can make a big impact on the story, like we were talking about before. I also think it was a big deal in context, because as we were talking about, Civil War was not the main Civil War book actually was relatively brightly colored. But the overall feeling of the Marvel Universe was relatively dark. And so that kind of accentuates the wackiness of this book even more, was because, there was Civil War, and then that led into Dark Reign, where, basically there was an editorial decision for almost 16, 18 months of pretty
darkness.
Yeah, pretty grim and gritty darkness, which I actually think was one of the better applications of that particular tool. For me, since I remember reading the book when it came out, the palette has always kind of stuck in my mind as something that I always kind of remember about it.
I absolutely love the colors in this book. They are so ridiculously vibrant.
Yeah. I love the colors, the art, the pencils, the inks, colors in this work so well for me. Like, without that, I don't know that I would enjoy it that much.
Yeah, and I agree. Immonen's panels are pretty, I want to say, standard.
Yeah, very traditional.
You get very traditional layouts. Like, he doesn't do the kind of crazy things that somebody like Humberto Ramos does.
Yeah.
But, like, the line work in this book is so good. Colors pop so much. Like, it feels incredibly dynamic. You have that very traditional panel layout.
Yeah, I mean, even with the traditional panel layout, it still somehow, like, because the art is so fluid, it moves you through that kind of rigid panel structure, like, really
it also
quickly.
makes it easy to read. If you, if you read left to right, top to bottom, you can read this comic without. I mean, it's something that I talk to with a lot with newer comic readers. Is sometimes they're like, I don't really know how to read this. What panel do I go to from here? And in this book, you really don't have that problem.
Right.
That's fair, yeah.
And we talked on the Dark Knight Returns episode about how Miller's using that 16-panel grid throughout the entire series and the way that makes it feel. And just flipping through Nextwave right now, there are a lot of 4 and 5 panel pages. Like, most of them are 4 panels, 5 panels, splash pages. And it makes the book feel like really energetic. Like, it's a quick read.
Yeah.
You can belt this thing out in a couple of hours easily.
Yeah, I read it so fast, and it's because I've read it before, but I think even reading it the first time, it's so I don't want to say simple to read, but it's accessible, like, from a panel standpoint. Like, it doesn't get in the way of the reading experience.
I feel like the short, the small number of panels per page, like, it really grabs you and runs you through the story. Like, it feels incredibly energetic.
Yeah.
It wants to be read.
I also
The
would
story
say that
wants you to read it.
I also would
Like the
for it.
Necronomicon.
I also would argue that it is easy to read, but I think that's good. I think that's a strength of the book. I actually do plan tonight to go home and recommend this to a couple people that don't read comics.
Yeah.
And I want to be like, read this, tell me what you think, and listen to the show.
I think it pushes a lot of the boundaries of, like, accessibility for superhero comics, because so many are mired in continuity in the wrong kind of ways, where it's like you have to know things to get all of the story, and this does it in kind of a way that is more preferable, in my opinion, where it's like you get more out of it if you know things, but you're not lost if you don't know those things.
Totally.
Yeah,
I think
that's fair.
I think
Maybe.
I think for the most part, not even necessarily just strictly Big Two, I don't think it's as common anymore to get super mired in continuity in the same way it was even 10 or 15 years ago.
I think it depends on what you read.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
There's some new 52 books that it's just like...
Well, and Spider-Man...
There's some Marvel books that are like that, too. I mean, X-Men is not an accessible...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Astonishing Spider-Man, the new number one... Or not Astonishing, Amazing Spider-Man, the new number one... Like, if you didn't read Superior Spider-Man, you're going to miss a lot.
Yeah.
So...
Well, I'm been talking about, like, big continuity. I'm talking about, like, reading Jonathan Hickman. If you miss one issue, you have no idea what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the counter-argument to that is... Well, not the counter per se, is... If comics are going to take this spot as, like, a medium form, where they are issuing comics frequently, monthly or more, but there are intentionally solid arcs in them, because I think that the arcs that they have now are different than the arcs that they used to have, in some sense. I think that there used to be an attempt to kind of make them open and airy, and that almost made it crazy, because then the arcs would go for, like, 2 years, because there would be all these, like, latching on points. But I think Hickman draws into this almost like six issues is a episode of TV or whatever, so you can't jump in the middle of it. But I think there's enough paradigm shifts that you can still kind of jump in on some of those books. But I also wanted to say that I mean, I'm not saying that comics is, especially the big two superhero comics, are completely free of that problem. I just think that they are in some ways more accessible. There are more titles that you could jump in on.
Yeah, I think
potentially. I mean, I don't know. Maybe
there's
naive.
There's some of that, but I also think that there used to be a higher concentration of kind of like one-off issues and like smaller episodes, and a lot of stuff has become more decompressed in the modern era.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not right about that, but it seems like that's
I do
kind of my
remember a lot
experience
of
with it.
things in the late 90s, early 2000s where like an arc would be 3 issues.
Right.
X-Men Phoenix something comes to mind. It was like 1998, and it was 3 issues.
Is that
and
Phoenix End song?
No, that was in 2004,
Yeah,
and that spawned like
That was 20 issues long.
It has been a long
it kind
time
of was
since I've
because it
read
was 3 trades
X-Men.
of 6 trades.
Oh,
of
yeah, I
6.
remember. Exactly what you're talking
200 issues long.
Because
Well-
I have all those too.
But I mean, Brant's argument's fair though, because in the '90s, like if you look at Batman, and it's like if you didn't start at the beginning of No Man's Land, if you didn't start at Cataclysm, there's like 200 issues that follow that in
it's
direct
pretty substantial.
succession. Yeah. So
I think they're kind of learning their lessons.
Yeah.
They're slow learners. Let's just put it that
it's
way.
definitely a different animal than it was 10 years ago. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's true. I'm just saying, for the most part, arcs. Well, I guess people now are writing for the 6-issue trade,
Yeah, I could see that.
and they go between 4 and 6 issues generally. And whereas back then it's like they did have the long runs, but then they also had incredibly short runs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
true.
20 years ago, if you got on a book, it was like, well, you don't have any assurance that you're going to be writing the next issue.
Right.
And I think that's definitely changed.
I think I said last episode that when my first issue was, the first appearance of Cardiac, that may have been a 2-story book, or a 2-book story.
Right.
I don't think so, though.
Yeah.
Now, that may have happened in the middle of Invasion of the Spider Slayers, which was like 14 parts, but I can't remember that for sure. But, I mean, yeah, I think the problem, the vice or the virtue, depending on how you want to take it, is you were a lot more likely to get 1 or 2 issue fillers than you are now.
Yeah.
But you could argue about whether or not that's a good thing. Does it hurt accessibility? It might in some circumstances, although if you're Marvel, at least for a while, was doing pretty good with accessibility because they were making, the Adventures of Spider-Man. These all-ages titles that have one-shot stories are a little bit more accessible, and then you've got kind of broader scripted narratives in their main books. And, I think that there's a lot of connection to what we see, in an era where you can binge watch anything on Netflix and TV shows live or die by their ability to have sustainable arcs. It's kind of funny that we would then deride comics for not doing enough of the other thing, which is having throwaway issues.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
I mean, I don't think it's a, like you say, it's not vice or virtue. It depends on how you look at it. Like, one is not superior to the other. They both have their place in the universe, and it's the balancing act of like how many of one do you have versus how many of the other, based on what your intention is.
Yeah.
Is your intention to get new readers, or is it to just like appease the readers that you already have?
Well,
because those may be mutually exclusive.
And I think the problem comes from not a lack of understanding the length a story needs, right? Like there are some stories that you should tell in an issue because it's an issue story. Right?
Yeah.
You need 22 pages to tell it, or you need, maybe it's 2 issues or whatever.
Right.
And this ruins television for me all the fucking time because people will try and take an idea and stretching it out over 12 episodes or 13 episodes. That's cool. Stretching it out over 36 fucking episodes.
Yeah.
You need a new idea.
But it's that TV concept of like, if people are still watching it, keep writing it. Like,
which is fair, but
because you don't want to just be like, oh, this is a 24 episode arc and have like the most viewers ever in the world, and then go, well, we're done. Like, you want to keep capitalizing.
That's
on that
fair,
capital,
but
right?
at the same point, that what I'm trying to say is not stop writing it.
Right.
What I'm saying is recognize the story you want to tell and how long it will take to tell it, and then tell it in that long. Don't take a single issue. Don't take a story that would fill a single issue and try and tell it over six issues.
Sure.
We're going to get tired of it.
But what happens when you've reached the end of your intentional story and you still have more viewers clamoring for more?
Make it part 1.
Because what this does is it ends.
Well, look
it kills me inside that there is no more next.
I have a really good example of this. Thor, God of Thunder, right?
Yeah.
You have that issue. And I'm not sure if we talked about it on the podcast, but I think it's issue 12. It's kind of like a decompression issue, right?
Yeah, it's an epilogue.
It's an epilogue. It stands by itself. That's it, right?
And it's not in the trade. They're so angry about it.
Which is kind of silly. But, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's like, don't start, right? Like, give us a new story. Or continue that story.
Right, yeah.
Don't stretch out the story that you want to tell because you need to fill 12 episodes. Have 12 episodes of content.
Well, I think what's great about this particular comic is that it's not one 12-issue story.
No.
It's a collection of 1 and 2 issue stories.
Yeah, smaller stories that come together. And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
It actually
that's
reminds me a lot of All-Star Superman.
Absolutely.
In that regard.
It's vignettes. Yeah. You're getting vignettes, right? It's a bunch of smallers that make a greater whole.
I feel like this one has a little bit of a stronger cohesive narrative over the 12 issues because there's kind of there's the stuff happening in the background with them kind of being roped into being agents of hate, then things going on with them being agents of hate, and I feel like All-Star Superman was pure vignette. This one has a little bit more of pay attention to next time on Nextwave feeling to it in a sense.
Yeah. Speaking of vignettes, I wanted to talk briefly about the alternate realities that Forbush Man sends all of the Nextwave members to, because that is just about my favorite part of this comic, where you're seeing all of these not brand X, what if kind of alternate reality versions of all these characters, and I found that whole thing incredibly cool.
Now you're talking about the thing where Machine Man went to go become a
insurance salesman.
Yeah, and Monica Rambeau is Captain Marvel in the 60s,
Yeah.
firing her Marvel gun, stealing the joy
I
from
really
a better
loved
universe.
the Ella Bloodstone one of those.
The Elsa Bloodstone is super cool.
Elsa,
the one
sorry.
with the Captain where he's on the dark side of the universe, where light can never reach. I don't know. There was just something really cool about those concepts to me.
And I love
just the way that they're drawn differently from the rest of the comic.
And I love how they get out of that, too.
Yeah.
Well, it's...
How they get out of it is amazing.
So, I mean, in some ways, yes, it's very sad that 12 issues later, Nextwave is done. But there's potential there, excuse me, where they could do more stories based in this. Then you just do Nextwave : the Adventures of Captain Marvel in the whatever verse. I think that there actually is a happy medium that can be embraced between Joe's point and your comment, which is, I think that some issues need to be, some stories you script, you're done. If something else comes of it, then you script your next series. I mean, that's, BBC does that constantly. They put out 6 episodes, and when people just go crazy over it and threaten to slit their wrist, they're like, well, I guess we'll write another one. I mean, you can tie yourself to that. As long as you don't write yourself into an absolute box, then you have the permission to kind of handle that either way.
But I'm sorry to interrupt you. Something can also be said for ending where it's supposed to end and not drawing something out.
Yeah, absolutely.
An example of this is there was, when Battlestar Galactica, the newer one, ended at season 4, there was a huge fan outcry for why are you ending this show? We're still going to watch it for 2-3 more seasons if you will put it out. And they're like, no, the show is done. This is the story we want to tell. If you want more Battlestar Galactica stuff, we're going to make this new miniseries for you.
And I definitely respect that. I respect that a lot. And I think that there is absolutely a balance you walk between that.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that there is one. There's not a clear universal answer to that. And that's what's so hard.
As far as I'm concerned, I think I subscribe to the Firefly principle. I would rather have a very limited number of installments in something that's incredibly good than have it go on too long and wear out its welcome.
I would rather have 3 seasons or 4 seasons now of Arrested Development than the 9th season of Scrubs.
Well, I mean, it's you never know. You never know. Like, some creative teams are going to be able to come up with new stories, and some aren't. And
that's true.
It's a case-by-case basis, and we just see what happens. But
After all that show did for him.
I mean, I am kind of, like, if the content is quality, I think they should put it out.
Absolutely.
And I guess there's not a clear
saying.
answer,
I guess I'm not really speaking as towards the quality of the content. I'm talking about the way that content is distributed. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem I have is when I feel like a story is dragging on too long. It's like, you could have cut this out and you could have told a much more cohesive story. Mm-hmm. I appreciate the story, that they're trying to tell. It's when either, you get the two sides of the coin, right? Either they're trying to squeeze too much into too small a space, or they're trying to take too little and extend it out over too long. And that's the only point I'm trying to make, is knowing the length of the story you want to tell and telling it over that length. I think is important. I think that's one of the reasons.
Not the this book doesn't have that problem.
No, absolutely not.
Like it does. The pacing in the story is really strong. It tells the stories it needs to tell, and it hits all the beats it wants to hit. I just wish there was more. I don't know. It's not unfair. It's just I want more.
Yeah.
Kate, did you have anything else you wanted to add about this series before we move on to Rex?
Yeah. So parts of this book really reminded me of Transmet, and realizing that Ellis had written superheroes before, I was just thinking, and I just thought this was interesting. I wonder how much of this came out of fans crying for the Transmetropolitan-esque in a superhero world.
Yeah,
because I did kind of get that vibe at some of the points where it's like, this is Warren Ellis writing the same way he did before. Mm-hmm. And
it's definitely a different superhero type thing than he did on like Planetary or The Authority, right? Like, it's very different than those superhero concepts.
Yeah.
So maybe.
And so that was just something I wanted to bring up, because I hope I'm not the only one who thought of that. But
yeah, it's funnier in a way. Like, Transmet has more humor in it, I think, than stuff like Planetary.
Well,
maybe
silly humor with lines that make no sense unless you're like really in the moment.
Yeah, this book makes me laugh harder than pretty much any other comic out there. Yeah. I think this is like the funniest comic I've ever read. It just, everything appeals to me in a way that like stuff in other books that's meant to be funny just like doesn't quite hit the same notes for me. It's just visually the gags like work for me. We talked about that 12th issue with all the just like crazy shit that they fight,
and the snappy dialogue.
Yeah, the snappy dialogue does it, but just like the fucking visually, like Stuart Immonen's visual jokes are awesome to me. Like the way that the flying 3 submarines mashed together.
I think it's 5 submarines.
Like that
mashed together.
Like visually just makes me chuckle. The pterodactyl soldier guys just make me laugh. Like the way that the robot broccoli guys like faces look makes me laugh. Like just
Tabby
everything.
spelling her own name wrong because she's too dumb.
Yeah, I mean, just the visual gags in here make me laugh as much as, if not more than the dialogue. But the dialogue is equally hilarious. Like Tabby has so much great dialogue. And
Explodo.
Elsa Bloodstone, just the way that her, like her dialogue is so unexcusably British. And
I love the way that she's just drawn as this like super lanky, gangly thing. But she kicks so much ass.
I love her in this series. Flashbacks to her dad.
Oh yeah,
are my favorite fucking thing ever.
I could honestly read Warren Ellis writing Elsa Bloodstone forever.
Yeah, I love the way that he looks like a Simon Belmont style monster hunter, but he's just like chucking a baby into a well with a monster. She's like killed something with a spoon, and he's like, use your newfound techniques on this other crazy thing.
Circumcise the Fletch monster of Belize.
It's like, what? What, child protection agency was sleeping on the job when this kid was born? But there's so much good stuff in this book. I mean,
so good.
I think that some of the humor is very universal too, and not just superhero related.
There's actually some shout outs to a certain extent to Ellis's treatment of Bloodstones in Young Avengers
Arena,
when they're talking about the origins of her younger brother. There's also some
totally
for sure
some call outs to that whole dad was the kind of guy just like threw you into stuff and made you do horrible things. So this book has had kind of at least a meta effect on the Marvel universe, if not a directly.
And I think that's cool, and that's the difference. Is like other writers taking some of the like feel and some of the emotion of this book and like the intention of this book versus like
it's
making the events fit into continuity.
Right.
It's always nice when writers kind of make a little homage or a little poke at other things that they like in the comic universe.
Oh yeah, and this both has this and other works have done that to this book too. So it's just, I love this. It's one of my favorite comics ever, just because it makes me laugh.
Yeah,
but
incredibly good.
It's also really well
completes
made.
The Trinity, the Warren Ellis Trinity.
Oh really? Me. What are the other ones?
The Trinity is Transmet, Planetary, and Nextwave.
I can live with that.
One day we'll talk about Planetary, and
we already did.
Rain on your parade. Oh well. Rain on your parade some other time.
Yeah, we'll do more.
You've tried to rain on my parade before,
I
Brent.
don't. I tried to talk about what I didn't like about Planetary on that show, and no one was having any. So I like Desolation Jones better than I like Planetary.
What? Sometimes a book is perfect.
Yeah, sometimes
I love
not.
Desolation Jones. I would love to see more Desolation Jones.
Me too.
I talk about that with Matt.
I think the
McGinnis, who's on the
trifecta
show.
of Ellis for me is all the stuff he didn't finish. It's Fell, Desolation Jones, and this.
Yeah.
It's
Global
like
Frequency?
Global Frequency is good, but it's not, to me, it's not anywhere near those other three, because those are the genres that I like humor and crime fiction. Like, that's all the stuff I like. So, anyway.
So, are we
Ellis
ready
aside,
to move on to Rex?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brant, do you want to kick us off?
No. Yes. I've decided, in the interest of perpetuating interesting Marvel team-ups, to pitch Kurt Busiek's opus, Avengers Forever. Yes! Which is a 12-issue trade. It was a 12-issue miniseries collecting a trade about basically some of the quote-unquote best Avengers, best, being brought together for a rousing game of let's chase Kang across time and do some fun stuff with time travel. So it's a fun parade through the timeline of Marvel Universe. It's a fun look at characters past, present, and future. It focuses around a sick Rick Jones who has the quantum bands. One of my favorite series that came out of the resolution of this story was the Captain Marvel series of the late 90s, early 2000s, written by Peter David.
That was a good series.
Yeah, it was a good. So anyway, it's just a personal favorite of mine. I think it's a really good. I think it's a fun read for folks who don't read a lot of stuff, although it certainly is most enjoyable if you have some knowledge of the Avengers. And this was before the Avengers had gotten as cool as they are now, so you'll notice that there's no Iron Man and Captain America and those guys, because they were cool, but they weren't that cool at the time.
Right.
This is actually one of the two best books I've never finished.
Yeah.
Because we were roommates, and I was reading this book on the couch, and I fell asleep, and I didn't finish it, and then you moved out.
Yep. I'm a bastard that way.
Yeah.
And that was like 6 years ago, and I still never finished
This
it.
is one of my favorite Avengers stories.
It also has a special place in my heart because I love Kang the Conqueror. I think he's just an awesome character, and this is all about him and the trouble he causes. So that's my recommation. Avengers
He's a
Forever.
troublemaker.
Awesome. Joe, what did you bring?
Yeah.
I brought Sex Criminals by Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky, which was recently collected in a trade. And
I'm giving Joe the stank eye.
Why?
You won't find out till next week.
Oh, okay.
And it was nominated for an Eisner this year.
It's Eisner nominated. I think it's a feast for the eyes. I think it deals with some pretty cool subject matter, which is basically two people meet each other at the party. They end up having sex, and they find out that each of them individually has the power to stop time whenever they orgasm. Or whenever they're...
Yeah, whenever they orgasm.
Whenever they're orgasm. And together, when they orgasm with each other, they're both the only ones active. And so it's... I mean, if that doesn't get you right off the bat, then I don't know what to tell you. I think it's cool, though, because I think it's an interesting story idea. It's unlike most things that I've of before, or story ideas that I've heard of before. But the other thing is that it deals with something that I think is still kind of taboo in comic, which is, and something that I'm kind of like, a lot of comics professionals have started out doing, like porno comics, and they're really still looked down upon in the industry at large. And I think this kind of toes a very important line. And so I don't just want to talk about it as a work, but also what it represents in the medium.
It's similar in some ways to the other comic we recently talked about by the butt stuff werewolf, Private Eye.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So,
yeah,
just a point of reference.
Well, Private Eye was Brian K. Vaughan.
Was it?
Yeah.
I always think it's Matt Fraction.
Nope.
No, yeah, that's
wrong.
Brian K. Vaughan. But it's
Private Eye is not by Matt Fraction.
But it's interesting because it's pushing boundaries. I think they're very similar in that way, in that it's pushing a boundary that's kind of been set up, and whereas the Private Eye does it in how you can present a work.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to need a official ruling that Matt Fraction and Brian K. Vaughan are the same person, secretly.
I think they write nothing alike.
No.
I don't know why you're on that
motion
train.
denied.
That's right. The court has found no basis for that argument.
That is thrown out of court.
But
comic book court. We'll look for that. That's coming on Fox this fall.
But yeah, in the interest of brevity, that's pretty much it. Sex Criminals.
All right.
I think it's a lot of fun, and Chip Zdarsky's art is great. The colors are amazing.
Yep.
It's an incredible book. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cade.
No.
I'll go last, like as usual. Cade, what do you want to read this week?
So I brought a Batman book, kind of in the vein of All-Star Superman that we did last week.
Yeah, that was last week.
I brought Batman and Robin by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely.
Oh yeah.
And a couple of other artists that I can't think of right now because each trade is drawn by a different person, and I am recommending we talk about the first 18 issues.
Nice. And this is
Dick Bat.
Yeah. Dick Grayson as Batman.
Dick Grayson as Batman, Damian Wayne as Robin,
yes.
And Damian Wayne trying to learn how to be a superhero without killing people like his mother.
It's harder than you think.
Yeah. Well, and also this is really about, Dick kind of filling a void he hoped he would never have to fill, and kind of him learning to be a mentor and also a Batman.
It's him stepping into the role of father for the first time.
Yeah, and a Batman for the first time too, because he's
taking
been
on
Nightwing.
His father's, like he is literally putting on his father's clothes.
Right, but Nightwing is a very different hero than Batman.
Yes.
And so,
and this Batman's a very different Batman.
Right, and so which
is awesome. It actually, quite frankly, as much as I poo-poo Grant Morrison stuff sometimes, it's actually a pretty good read.
And this is kind of what I talk about when I talk about legacy, that sometimes some characters should die and be replaced with other characters.
But all that said,
I agree
we
with
should
you.
never call it Dick Bat.
I have to second.
This makes me giggle.
I think instead we should call it Dick Butt.
I am for this.
I agree.
No.
But I think we should refer to everything as Dick Butt.
We'll have to go to the jury.
The Dick Butt Man.
Comic book court ruling will...
One of us will be the plaintiff, the other defendant.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the person who recommended it to me called it that. So and it
no,
made me
it
giggle.
lovingly so on the internet. It is called Dick Bat.
Excellent.
But, it's definitely a really interesting series and a good recommendation after All-Star Superman because of the same creative team, but also because a lot of the ideas about heroism and like what it means to be a hero, I think, were continued in that series as well. So, Toby, what do you want to read?
I brought back a book that I previously recommended a
Not
good long while ago.
Not allowed.
What?
I said not allowed.
Not allowed? No.
Okay. No,
okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm breaking the rules.
Yeah.
This is Prince of Cats by Ron Wimberly.
Mm-hmm.
And what this book is a adaptation of William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, recast in Brooklyn in like the late 80s, early 90s with black street gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, the entire book is written in iambic pentameter. It's not all original dialogue, but it conforms to the rhyme scheme that Shakespeare wrote in, which is a really interesting effect because they're using modern, like, street vernacular, but they're talking in the way that characters talk in Shakespeare. It's a really interesting comic. It's got incredibly vibrant colors. Ron Wimberly has this really cool style. It's kind of got like a graffiti aspect to it.
Yeah, kind of little pop art colors in some ways, like really bold, bright primary colors.
It's really different from almost anything that you're going to find out there. If you've been reading Prophet, Wimberly recently did a fill-in issue where he was taking over the art, and I think it was 43, but I could be wrong on that.
That sounds right.
43 or 44, something around there. And this was put out by Vertigo a couple of years ago, just an independent project that he did, and it's really, really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
It's something I've been meaning to read for a while.
Yeah. I thumbed through it last time you brought it, and it's like, it's on my to-read shelf, which is a million miles long. But
if you love comic book color, this is like one that you cannot miss.
That is true.
All right. That's Prince of Cats.
Yeah. This week, I was looking at our recommendations list, and I realized that we've only ever recommended one Avengers story. Ever.
Interesting.
And it was Avengers Forever. Which I think was recommended by you.
It may very well have
last
been,
time you were,
actually.
or one of the last times you were on the show. And I was like, oh man, there's other Avengers stories that are good to read. So I was kind of thumbing through my head. And the one that I read most recently and enjoyed the most was Avengers Arena. Which we mentioned earlier on the show because the brother of Elsa Bloodstone is one of the main characters of that story. But basically, they're taking this like D-list character, Arcade, this D-list villain, basically, and
what are you talking about? He was in Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge.
Yeah,
the 1992 Super Nintendo video game that literally everyone remembers.
Super Nintendo smash hits. No, that game's a pile of garbage, and I own it. And I'm saying that. No, it's basically he has always been kind of this like ridiculous character where he's like, I'm for the entertainment value, I'm gonna steal the X-Men and take them to Arcade World, and we'll roll giant pinballs at them and make them escape my Arcade World.
It's basically like Saw crazy like 80s comic book version.
No one ever dies. As far as I know, no one ever gets hurt in those stories. He's very ineffectual at what he does in those, based primarily on the fact of when they were written. Like, it was a different era in comic books. So this is a modernization of that character, and Arcade was given this book in prison, basically, and it influenced him very much in his new plan, which was to kidnap a bunch of super-powered kids, put them into an arena together where they fight each other to the death.
And broadcast it, too.
And... Well, not kind of. Yeah, I mean, like, he's recording it. He's definitely recording it.
I thought it was implied that he was recording or actually broadcasting, but I don't remember.
Yeah, there's a plot
it was recorded
point
for
that comes
later
out.
broadcast.
Oh, that's
and this
right.
I mean, it's kind of referencing like the Hunger Games or Battle Royale.
Because they never overtly say what book he got, but
I think later they mentioned that it's someone says, "Oh yeah, I read that," and he's like, "No, the original that's based on."
Yeah.
And although none of these three books like were really based on one another, but the idea is it could either be like Hunger Games or Battle Royale or Lord of the Flies, right? And so like it's this island where all these kids are, and he's gonna like fuck with them via the game world to get them to kill each other, and some crazy shit happens in this book, and some characters that I absolutely love that barely get used anymore in this. There's two runaways in this with Nico and Chase and Cammy from Annihilation, which we talked about. She's in this, and she's awesome in this series. And
the cast of Avengers Academy.
Yeah, some of the Avengers Academy guys, like Hazmat, and what's the giant red guy with the skull?
Metal.
Her boyfriend, Metal, and there's the guy that talks to the Sentinel.
Yeah.
And like most of their names I forget.
Yeah.
There's like a water lady from
Darkhawk is also
Reptile.
there, isn't he?
Yeah, Reptile, Darkhawk, the lady from the Braddock School, the young kid Braddock from another dimension, like the young Captain Britain from another dimension.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people in this book. There's like a Deathlock. kid, and it's awesome. It's a cool cast of characters, and the book starts out and it's like, well, why would these heroes all fight each other? Like, what's going on? It takes a couple issues to get there, but once it does, it's like,
there's some great narrative devices.
This comic was very controversial when it first came out.
Oh yeah, as well it should be. I mean, it's kids murdering each other.
Well, let's not spoil it too much until people have had a chance to read it.
Well, okay.
But it's like crazy shit happens.
Murder does occur in the
people
book.
Die. Characters you like.
Yeah. And
well, I didn't like them. That's why they deserve to die.
Good. Then your side wins.
Excellent.
This sounds like Avengers Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's really cool. The concept was cool because originally his intention was to do like a teen drama high school type book, and this was going to be one of the subplots that happened. And the editorial team was basically like, just do that. Just start with that right out of the gate. And so he did, and it worked out really well. So it was a good moment of editorial input on that one. So
awesome.
A very cool series. Joe, what would you like to read?
I love Avengers Forever. I love Avengers Forever.
We haven't talked about an Avengers book, so
we haven't.
We talked about Earth X, which is indirectly sort of an Avengers
I know.
stories.
Toby is holding up Prince of Cats because I told him he should bring it, and I would vote for it. But I also told him to bring a backup book in case other people had good stuff.
This implying that you didn't think it was that good.
No,
very nice.
You should always do that. You should always have a backup. Well,
that's why I don't tell anyone what I'm bringing. Surprise attack.
That's fair.
I've literally brought Prince of Cats the last, I think, 4 weeks and not pitched it.
Yeah,
it was time.
That's fair.
But you should vote what your heart tells you to vote.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do as Senator or Congressman Underwood would tell me to do, and vote my conscience and say Avengers Forever.
Nice. Brant.
Avengers Academy.
Ooh. Cade.
Arena. Excuse me. Avengers Arena.
Yeah. The continuation.
Arcademy.
Prince of Cats.
All right. Tell me.
I am going to vote purely because the next episode is episode 69 for Sex Criminals.
Oh, how clever.
Why didn't I pitch it on that one?
I don't know.
So you get to pick the book.
I do.
Or you could vote for Batman, then I don't know how we break ties anymore.
Well, the show is
Fight
canceled.
to the death.
The show is canceled and we all have to... Yeah.
Show canceled.
We have to go to an island somewhere in an undisclosed location and fight to the death.
Podcast canceled. Fuck you, Joe.
Yeah, that's the rules. That's in the charter.
I'll take the hit.
No, I'm going to vote Avengers Forever. I mean, it's been brought before, and we really just have not talked about Avengers Marvel stuff enough. So that's why I brought an Avengers book, because I wanted to talk about Avengers.
That's good. Then we should talk about Avengers. If you want to talk about Avengers, we can talk about Avengers.
I think we should talk about Avengers.
I think
you want to talk about Avengers? I'd like to talk about Avengers.
We're going to talk about Avengers.
Brian Michael Bendis, New Avengers from 2005.
This is pre-Avengers of that, but
No,
I'm gonna vote for Avengers Disassembled.
I read Avengers.
I'm
gonna bring Avengers Disassembled. Yes.
No, I'm voting for it, even though no one pitched it. No,
also,
let's read Avengers Forever. I also love Kang and time travel, so I can't say no to that.
I agree.
You know I can't. This is a classic.
It's good.
I'm actually going to finish this book.
Yeah,
finally.
Aren't you excited?
Very good.
Or you could not finish it and then just not talk for part of the episode.
Like, this is the part I've read.
I'm going to talk based on my memories from 6 years ago.
And then when we get to the part you haven't heard yet, you need to just shove your fingers in your ear and go la 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 la.
So
we will cut
what I
your
do to
channel
Joe every day.
Yeah.
All right.
Will Toby finish the book? Will we talk about it next week? Will Brand join us again?
Will we resolve our sound issues?
We resolve our sound issues. Tune in next week to View from the Gutters to find out.
Same view time.
Same gutter time. Same gutter place.
All right. Podcast canceled. Bye, everybody.
So next week, Avengers Forever.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Oh, and don't forget about our contest.
Yes,
Don't
the
forget about
contest,
our
the very important
I forgot
contest.
to mention at the beginning of the show, but
Well, just throw it on retroactively.
Yeah, I will. Okay, you heard about it at the beginning of the show. You didn't even know that I fucked up. Awesome.
Good
See
job,
you next
everybody.
time, guys. Bye.
I love you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to View from the Gutters. I hope our recommendations have inspired you to go out and find some new comics you'll enjoy. Join us next time for a discussion of our selected title, but like every week, we encourage you to read all of the recommended books. In the meantime, please leave us an iTunes review. It really does help new listeners find the show. You can also like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us on Twitter at ViewFRTHGutters. Feel free to email us at contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Please send us any questions, comments, or recommendations you might have. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we post new videos every week. And thanks again for listening. And as always, keep reading.